It's late on a Thursday evening. You're alone in the kitchen, making coffee, and you catch yourself mid-sentence, talking out loud to no one. Not just a word, a full sentence. Maybe two. You stop, look around, make sure no one heard, and somewhere in the back of your mind, the familiar question surfaces. Why do I keep doing this? You've done it your whole life. In the car, in the shower, walking down the street with earphones in so people think you're on a call. You've explained decisions to yourself out loud, rehearsed conversations that never happened, argued with people who weren't in the room. You've talked yourself through hard nights when no one was awake to talk to, narrated your frustration in an empty kitchen at 11 in the morning, worked through a decision by saying it out loud 17 times until it finally made sense. And you've always assumed this meant something was slightly off about you. You've hidden it, caught yourself in public and gone quiet, felt embarrassed when someone overheard, laughed it off with some version of sorry, talking to myself again as if it were a confession. But psychology tells a completely different story. Talking to yourself out loud isn't a quirk. It isn't loneliness. It isn't evidence that something went wrong. What it actually is, that answer comes later, because the real explanation is not the one most people expect. And if I give it to you now, you'll miss the part that changes how you see yourself. So let's start somewhere else. Have you ever noticed that a problem feels completely impossible when it's inside your head? Thoughts circling, no clear direction, no way through, and then the moment you say it out loud, something shifts. Not because you said anything new, not because anyone responded, just because you heard yourself say it. Suddenly, the problem has edges. It has shape. It stops being a fog and becomes something you can actually look at from the outside. That's not a coincidence. That's your brain doing something very specific, and doing it well. When you say a thought out loud, your brain processes it on multiple channels at once. You don't just think it, you hear it. And hearing it creates a kind of clarity that staying silent never quite produces. The thought becomes external, observable, separate from you in a way that makes it easier to examine. This is why surgeons narrate procedures under pressure, why athletes talk themselves through performances at critical moments, why the most prepared person before a difficult conversation is almost always the one who rehearsed it out loud the night before, not in their head, but in the room, to the empty wall, out loud. Talking to yourself is not a crutch. It's one of the most effective cognitive tools your nervous system has available. Maybe that's why silence has never quite felt like enough space for you to actually think. Maybe that's why the thoughts that stay inside never feel as real as the ones you hear yourself say. But this still doesn't answer the deeper question. Plenty of people know that saying things out loud helps with focus. Most of them don't do it the way you do. Most of them don't need to. So why you specifically? Developmental psychology offers the beginning of an answer. Young children talk to themselves constantly, narrating their play, working through problems out loud, describing what they're doing as they do it. Most children gradually internalize this. The external voice becomes internal. The need to speak out loud fades because the inner channel grows strong enough to carry the weight alone. Imagine two children both talk to themselves, both think out loud, both are trying to understand the world in the only way they know how, but only one grows up still needing that voice for the rest of their life. Why? What happens next is the reason this habit follows some people into adulthood while it quietly disappears for others. And it has very little to do with intelligence and almost everything to do with what it felt like to have your thoughts received by the people around you. If you grew up in a home where your thoughts were heard and reflected back, where someone genuinely listened, where your inner world was treated as something that mattered, your internal voice learned to trust itself. It didn't need to be spoken out loud to feel real. But if that attunement was inconsistent, if the adults around you were overwhelmed, distracted, emotionally unavailable, or simply not equipped to hold space for what you were feeling, something different happened. Your internal voice learned that to be real, it needed to be heard. And if no one else was listening, the only available option was to become the one who listened. Think about what that means for a child. Not a dramatic realization, just a quiet adaptation. You start talking through your thoughts because the alternative, leaving them unheard, feels unbearable in a way you can't yet name. And you're still doing it, not because you never grew up, because the habit worked, and because some part of you is still, in some conversations, waiting to be heard the way you needed to be heard back then. Maybe that's why you replay conversations long after they end, still trying somewhere to be understood by someone who wasn't fully there. Maybe that's why talking it through out loud feels less like a choice and more like a need you can't quite explain. Before we go further, think about this. When do you talk to yourself the most? When you're calm or when you're overwhelmed? Take a moment. Don't just answer automatically. Think about the last few times you caught yourself doing it. What was happening in your life at that moment? For most people who do this consistently, the answer is overwhelmed, and that tells you something important about what the voice is actually doing and why it developed in the first place. For a nervous system that grew up where calm was unreliable, where the emotional temperature of the house could shift without warning, where safety felt conditional rather than guaranteed, the voice became something more than a thinking tool. It became a regulation tool. When everything outside felt unpredictable, the internal voice became the one constant, the one presence that didn't change depending on someone else's mood, the one thing that stayed when everything else shifted. You talked to yourself because at some point, it was the most reliable form of company you had access to. Not a substitute for connection, a form of it turned inward, because inward was the only direction that felt safe. And this is where talking to yourself splits into two completely different paths, one that helps you heal and one that keeps you stuck. There is talking to yourself that feels clarifying, the kind that moves, takes something tangled and makes it clear, processes something heavy and finally sets it down. When it's done, it's done. You feel lighter. You feel like you understand something you didn't understand before. And then there's talking to yourself that loops. The imaginary argument you've had 40 times with someone who will never hear it. The explanation you keep rehearsing for a person who isn't in the room. The scenario that plays again and again long after there's anything useful left to extract from it. Psychologists call this rumination, and it looks like processing. It feels like working something through, but it doesn't complete. It just returns. When the internal dialogue is working well, it processes and releases. When it loops, it's almost always because the nervous system is carrying something unfinished. Grief that was never expressed. A conversation that ended wrong and was never repaired. A need that was never spoken to the person who needed to hear it. The voice keeps returning to these places, not because it is broken, but because it is still trying to finish something it was never allowed to finish. If you have loops you've been running for years, you already know exactly which ones they are. You don't need me to describe them. You felt them the moment I mentioned it. The voice isn't the problem. The unfinished thing underneath it is. And recognizing the difference between the voice that heals and the voice that circles, that is often where something begins to shift. There's one more thing, the assumption almost everyone makes, and it's wrong. The assumption is that talking to yourself is a sign of loneliness, that it's what people do when they have no one else to talk to, a compensation for missing connection, a symptom of isolation. Research finds the opposite. People who engage in sophisticated self-directed talk score significantly higher on measures of emotional regulation, cognitive flexibility, and psychological resilience. They are not more isolated. They are often more self-aware, more capable of examining their own experience with honesty and distance than people who never develop the habit. What talking to yourself actually reflects is a high capacity for self-referential thought. The ability to step outside your own experience and look at it, to hold your own mind at arm's length and examine it with some degree of clarity. This is not a symptom of something missing. This is one of the defining features of psychological maturity. The person who talks to themselves in the car isn't someone who has no one to call. They're someone whose inner life is active enough, honest enough, and complex enough to require more than silence. And now the answer you've been waiting for since the first sentence. The real reason, not the neuroscience, not the childhood environment, not the regulation mechanism, all of that is true and all of it matters. But underneath all of it, there is something simpler and more important. At some point, you needed a voice that would stay, a presence that wouldn't disappear mid-sentence, someone who would hear you through to the end of the thought without looking away, without getting distracted, without making you feel like you were asking for too much just by needing to be understood. And no one showed up in the way you needed, so you became that. Not because you were broken, not because you were too much, not because there was something wrong with the depth of your need to be heard, but because something in you, something quiet and persistent and completely unwilling to abandon itself, refused to leave your own thoughts unheard. You didn't talk to yourself because no one was listening. You learned long ago that if you wanted to be understood, you had to become the person who listened.